What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brozy. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm good. Just on the tail end of a cold, so hopefully my voice will hold up. Hey, everybody. I'm looking forward to this one because I think this is a good one that all healthcare providers should know, and even lay people, really,
Yeah,
with how to go about doing a fitness routine.
yeah, exactly. So, what we're basically this podcast is supposed to serve the average person who is just starting to begin their fitness routine. So, in some form or fashion, they went to the doctor, and I see this a lot with my clients. I don't know about you, Keoni, but they go to their primary care physician, they get some blood work done, and the blood work isn't as great as they would like it to be, or the doctor
Right.
would like it to be. And then the doctor kind of mentions how they need to start these things, and then that kind of kickstarts that they need a lifestyle change. And so
Right.
typically you see people immediately go like right into jogging or something like that, and then they end up injuring themselves. So the whole point of this is just how do you go about beginning, and what sort of things do I think about as a trainer, and what sort of things does Keoni think about as far as beginning safely a fitness routine. So I'm just going to take us through a few
Which you
step-by-step
don't really
points.
get, right? When you go to a doctor, if the doctor has the wherewithal of telling you to exercise, I mean, they
That's a
don't
great
really
point.
give you any type of program on how to start.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You certainly aren't getting a handout or anything like that, which
Right,
that's a good
right.
point. Yeah.
And I would also say this. I mean, especially I'm almost 50, and I would say, especially for both men and women, but especially men. Men have this in their head that they're always their 20-year-old self, and they
Hmm.
just go out there and run the 5 miles they used to when they're in their
Yeah.
20s,
You just do a
And
few of these and a few of these, and you're ready to go.
there you go. Yeah, that's right. And then wonder why it hurts so bad and don't ever want to go back to that again. So yeah, it's fun.
So this is kind of my order of operations for beginning your
Okay.
fitness routine. This is the first things I sort of think about, or the first things to address. So you put yourself in the position of now, what's the best course of action to begin exercising? You understand that you have to make these lifestyle changes. And so how do we go about doing it safely? And point one, honestly, is just movement. So it doesn't matter what you do. It's just beginning with movement and not doing something explosive, I would say. So I've got an example from one of my friends here. He was actually went to PT school with me, so shout out to Ned. But Ned, uh, was a little overweight, and he was immediately telling me about beginning a fitness routine, and that he started essentially like jumping over the kettlebell and doing a bunch of plyometrics.
Oh
And
wow.
lo and behold, 2 or 3 weeks later, we're in class and his knee hurts and stuff like that. So it's like
Right.
that's I think the wrong way to immediately go into it, which we see a lot of times is people are super gung ho in the beginning, and they start into something that may be a little bit more in a nice way, but for lack of a better term, more advanced than they're ready for at that stage.
Right.
So I
And an
wouldn't
example for
begin.
me. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say an example from one of my patients is this was a woman who wanted to start exercising. I don't know if her doctor told her to or not, but decided to do a round of jump roping. Like
Yeah.
she would do 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, and lo and behold, she dealt with plantar fasciitis for like 2 years after that. I mean, it was like on and off, and that was what sparked it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that your example, my example, paint the picture perfectly of just you can't necessarily get off the couch and expect to be ready, just like you mentioned with these,
Yeah.
with males in particular. You can't get off the couch and expect you're ready to do something that you see on TV, or participate in the CrossFit games, or go jump rope for hours and hours, or start jumping over
Right.
stuff, which is what my
Right.
friend was doing. Your friend is talking about.
which I have done.
Right. And we're all guilty of it.
Right.
Absolutely. But the point is, we want to cross off plyometrics, which is that quick kind of
Yeah.
you eccentrically load the muscle, it lengthens, and then you concentrically blast through. So think of like a squat jump, repeated
Yeah.
squat jumps. That's not
Right.
something we necessarily want to start with. And it's mainly due to two factors. At that point, you're more likely, if you're the person that the podcast is addressing, or you're the person who went to the doctor and has to make these lifestyle changes, you might be overweight, and this is going to cause some excessive forces, whether that be in the knee for my friend Ned, or whether that be in the plantar fascia or in the foot for your patient, Keoni. And then second,
Mm-hmm.
at this point, you have a lack of strength, coordination, a variety of deficits that contribute to poor movement patterns. And when you load these up or do more explosive type things, you have a tendency to expose these movement patterns, or this dysfunctional movement pattern. So just like an example of this, as a personal trainer, if someone does like a body weight squat, I'm doing like an FMS, if you're familiar, a functional movement screen,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks good. If you can load that up and put some weight on it, and you'll immediately see some of the dysfunctions come out. So
Right.
using that knowledge kind of in the opposite way of, we don't want to intensely load up or intensely demand our body at those very beginning stages, because we don't have the strength, the coordination, all those sorts of things. So that shouldn't be our first step. Our first step shouldn't be jump rope. It shouldn't be the CrossFit Games or the 5K or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And then point 2, I kind of mentioned this in point 1, actually, it's just movement, and that's truly just weight loss. So that deals back to point 1, where if you can decrease those excessive forces that you're going to encounter, that's going to help stave off injury. So something we definitely want to do. And I think people get really bogged down in, how do I make sure I do this right? Or should I do 3 sets of 5 or whatever the case may be, very specific variables, when at the end of the day, if you're at that stage, you've just got out of the doctor and you just need to make a lifestyle change, make the smallest one possible. And that's going to make a huge difference. And part of that starts with just movement. And so that's walking, going for outdoor walks, being outside, those sorts of things, but just activities, walking, swimming, biking, golfing, climbing, jogging, all that kind of stuff. And then jogging is one where I often see people kind of pick this up. And there's certainly reasons why jogging isn't the best one to start immediately, like at the person in this stage. And those kind of go back to what I mentioned in point 1. But it still can be useful. And then if you really like jogging, that's going to bring me to one of my later points, where it's just, if there's an activity that particularly we enjoy, or it gets us off the couch, or helps create that positive lifestyle change, then we certainly want to train around that activity, so you can progress and work on that activity specifically. And I think that helps a lot of people with not necessarily the retention, but the consistency of doing the exercise routine. And so my third point, so we've started moving at this point, and we started moving safely. We're not going ballistic or huge plyometric activities are really loading up our body. The third, the little pillar, and we kind of talk about this in physical therapy, whereas like if you're gonna strengthen someone, or like in a treatment session, we would put mobilizations of a joint before we do other things like strengthening or things like that. And the reason for that is you're not going to strengthen through a partial range of motion, or you want to enhance the full range of motion and have the full range of motion available for your activity, for you to strengthen and coordinate that full range of motion. So at the base of my little pillar here is range of motion type things. So exercises like yoga, stretching protocols, foam rolling, all things like that should be kind of where after you start moving, that's where we want to start addressing, make sure we have good range of motion that can be used in further activity that we're going to start doing.
Okay.
So just as some common things that come up, most beginners, so this is just general for the general public, most beginners need more flexibility in their hip flexors, their thoracic spine, shoulders, chest. And then most people suffer from these common muscular imbalances or muscular syndromes, and they're lower cross and upper cross syndromes. I don't know if you've heard of these, Keoni, but they're pretty common, definitely within personal training. And even
so when you say lower cross, upper cross, you talking like the hunched over?
Yep.
Give me
So
examples of that.
Yeah, we'll break those down. So what you essentially have, they're cross syndromes. So you think of an X, and if you're looking at the video right now, you can see me making the Malcolm X with my hands. And you have an X of weakness and an X of tightness, essentially.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if weakness is the right word, because weakness can correlate with tightness, but you just have an area that's overly tight and an area that's overly stretched or overly weak. And again, these are just common syndromes. So for the upper cross ones, the things that are tight, so specific to our range of motion, what we want to stretch out would be pecs, like pec major or minor, and upper traps. So those are what we see as commonly tight in upper cross syndrome. So to do that, just a pec major, you could do like a doorway stretch. You can look any of these things up online.
Right.
Or do like an upper trap stretch, where you could just, if you're sitting in a chair right now, grab the chair with your arm, you bend your head away and look towards the shoulder you're stretching, because the upper trap actually comes and attaches to the bony prominence on the back of your skull there. So if you look towards, you're actually getting more of a stretch to the upper trap. So in the upper cross syndrome, again, you can look these up. That's what's typically the most tight. And typically we see upper cross syndrome a lot. It's almost a joke. And like when I first started, I just went through a 12-week PT rotation. When I first started that rotation, in my evaluations, I was putting, patient has forward head posture, internally rounded shoulders, And my clinical instructor was like, yeah, who doesn't? That's really not that important. So that just goes to show these are pretty common. And if you start in these sorts of things without any guidance, you're in a good, safe place and most likely addressing some muscular imbalances that you do have.
Yeah, and the reason why most people do, right? It's like our lifestyle of constant sitting and looking forward with the head tilted forward, especially with that upper cross.
Yeah, exactly. You look at all of the muscles that I listed there, the hip flexors. So that's seated posture, thoracic spine. We're just kind of kyphotic, and the thoracic spine doesn't move, and kyphotic is just forward bend, like Keoni said. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. What's his name?
Yeah.
And
like our lives were constantly bent curling up, right? We need to work those opposite muscles. Yeah.
And then the shoulders and the chest there, think about using your computer. So you're internally rounded to type on the keyboard. You're protracted, your shoulders are forward and rounded forward. So exactly like Keoni's saying, it's our lifestyle that creates these things. And that's why we see these so commonly. And then just for lower crossed, very common hip flexor tightness. A lot of people have hip flexor tightness. Try and find a great stretch for the hip flexors that doesn't bring you into a lot of back bending. So your lower back shouldn't really be bending and compressing too much. And then the spinal erectors are also tight. So that would coincide with kind of the hip flexors and that back bending. Yeah. So a lot of people are stuck in an anterior pelvic tilt, which if you just picture the pelvis as a bowl, it's tilting forward like you're pouring the soup out in front of you. And people are often stuck in that kind of position. And that is only you're further exacerbated in that position with tight hip flexors and tight spinal erectors, because they both attach there and help pull that into that position. And again, those are just common things that we see in range of motion with these typical muscular imbalances that the average person can likely address on their own. And you should be starting here. After you begin moving, you begin going for a walk or whatever activity actually gets you consistent and adhering to some sort of protocol or some sort of fitness regimen, whether that be yours or one you found online. Then this range of motion type stuff should prepare you for our next point, which would be the strength. So you've got the range of motion. It's kind of like I said in the physical therapy session, where you'll typically see like the manual work, or the physical therapist will most likely put their hands on you and do things to you at the beginning of the session, because they're trying to get more improved range of motion, or a variety of reasons, but they could be trying to get more range of motion to prepare to strengthen through the full range of motion. So now we're strengthening. So how can we do that? We can do that with body weight movements. Me and Keoni love those. You can take those anywhere. Don't need a gym membership. They're free, all that good stuff. You could take them anywhere. Weight training, and that'd be any form of resistance, whether that's bands, kettlebells, heavy home objects, anything. And then again, in the concept of these muscular imbalances, so upper crossed and lower crossed, upper cross syndrome, typically people see a lot of weakness in the mid to lower traps. So we think of these as the muscles that help control and bring the scapulas down and back and together as well. And then the deep neck flexors, longus colli and longus capitis. So these are really deep muscles to our neck, and they help control. So our neck also has a curve like our lower back, and these deep neck flexors help control that curve. So you're not pinching or putting a lot of stress on the nerves or the anatomical features and the posterior aspect of our neck. Okay. So we can strengthen those sorts of things, like a mid trap or mid or lower trap. Things we could think of to strengthen those would be like a Y. So if we have dumbbells in our hands, we're laying on a bench and we're lifting our arms up and overhead, or like a band pull apart. So anything that really brings those scapulas down, back, and together. It's kind of what we're talking about there. Mm-hmm. And for lower crossed, specific things that we see as weak, and again, this coincides with the tight hip flexors and tight spinal erectors. These lower cross muscles being the glutes, typically weak, and the abdominals. So those are where you want to start strengthening. And then a specific note, like for example, picking that activity that you enjoy most. I see a lot of people who immediately start jogging, and then they come to me after they started jogging, and maybe now they have knee pain and they can't get past like 2.5 miles or something like that. That's typically what I see a lot, is they go through that phase where their primary care kind of makes all these great points and now they're on board, and then they start jogging, and then they get a month or 2 months into it, and now all of a sudden they can't go past, like I said, 2 miles, 2.5 miles, whatever the case may be, without having significant knee pain or some swelling after or something like that. And a large part of that is due to the weakness and not going through all of these points that I just made in order, in a sequential order that allows them to distribute forces properly. So if it is jogging, that's like the activity that you love, or jogging was that activity that was doable for you, then we want to really address the points within these syndromes that relate to jogging. So we really want to strengthen the glute med, the glute max. The glute med is super important. We could do a whole podcast on that, about how it just helps stabilize the pelvis, your running pattern, all that sort of stuff. And like you could start with the abdominals and the medial knee compartment. So all those things are going to be really important for you to strengthen, to distribute forces properly while you're jogging. And so just thinking about what activity is it that you like, that's keeping you in your fitness routine, and then training and strengthening and going through all of these points as it relates to those. And that's your best bet for kind of setting yourself up for long-term safe success.
So what's an example then? Like most people are dealing with upper cross, lower cross syndrome, right? And you can see this when somebody starts doing an exercise routine and you do a functional movement screen on them, or you actually see somebody that's just like crazy. They look like they're good on their form of squats without any weight. And then as soon as you load them up, you see the body kind of exaggerate these things. So I guess my question is take me through like a practical example. If let's say one of my come to train with me, just starting out, they want to get into exercise. How would I, as a trainer, take them through this with, they show up at the gym, I don't really know them. And what do I need to do as a trainer just to, I guess, do a quick movement screen and then stretch them? And then how do I start with, if I'm going to do, I don't know, squats, I obviously want to start with body weight squats, if that, or maybe standing up and sitting down in a chair or something, just see where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you just said there answers your question, as far as you just want to see where this person is. So that starts with general movement. How do they move? And we're talking specifically, I guess, right at this point, personal training clients. So we're assuming the person doesn't have pain or that sort of thing. We want to see how they move, what that looks like. And we want to view it from a variety of different angles, from the front, from the side, from the back. And all that will allow us to kind of see. And if you take there's like I think it's called Huddle. It's an app, Keoni, where you can like slow down time or slow down the video and like line up forces and that sort of thing. And you can see, that when this person goes below 90, their pelvis becomes unlevel, that sort of thing. So all those things, like the technology available to us, can be super useful for this. But I would say it really starts with seeing that person move. And then from there, if I get someone, like I'll use my client Will, my personal training client Will, as an example. And he's essentially where I got the idea for this podcast from. Went through exactly what I've been explaining, where he met with his PCP, started jogging, got my flyer on his door. A few months later, he can't jog anymore because of the knee pain. He calls me and And with him, it was, okay, so he's not, like, he can move. I can see him do active range of motion and like body weight squats without a problem. Now let me see, if I give him a 25-pound dumbbell to hold while he does these squats, what happens? And that's where all these compensations start to really fire, because I've overloaded them now. And I'm not doing this for many reps, but it allows me to see, these are where the muscular imbalances occur and that sort of thing. Now in the physical therapy realm, we have a lot more examination steps that we would look at, and can give you a lot more answers as to what muscle is tight or what specific thing should we intervene on? And that would be something like a muscle length test, which is essentially more or less it's you stretch a muscle and does it feel tighter on one side versus the other? And that lets you know if that muscle is tight or not. And that's a little bit more specific to my school and education, but
Right. I mean,
you can,
the physical therapist is definitely the expert on that, but most people don't see are going to see the personal trainer way before they see the physical therapist.
yeah. And I would say for the
And
personal
if
trainer, it starts with seeing the move, and a good
yeah,
standard screening like the functional movement screening is
yeah,
fantastic at bringing out these points, and it's very easy to understand. Um, Off the top of my head, I think it's like 7 or 9 points.
yeah,
And it's a kit that your gym may or may not have, and it just makes it very, very easy to bring out all of these basic, low level, typical dysfunctions that we see in clients. So a
yeah.
good functional movement screening, if you don't have that available to you, any sort of active movement screening works. I had a patient or a client specifically who did not want, she said she didn't like unilateral leg activities like lunges and things like that. And she
Yeah.
had been in a car accident and fractured her leg, blah, 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 blah. So one of the first things I did when we first met was, okay, well, let me see what it looks like when you do lunge. And immediately all sorts of, shifting of the weight this way, the butt comes out this way, all sorts of muscular imbalances show themselves. And you can just use that as your screen and tool
Yeah.
to address what you see. I think sometimes we make it really complicated when it's not that complicated. And that's a large part of what I'm trying to get across. Even though I may list some big muscle or something like that. At the end of the day, step one is be safe. Step two is move. Step three is increase your range of motion so you can move through a whole range of motion.
Yep.
And step four is strengthen that range of motion so you can properly distribute all the forces, all the strength that you need through full, well range of motion. And then step five being you go beyond that. Step five is when you're willing to take on new things. You're willing to get off the couch and try that 5K, maybe go to a CrossFit class. Now's where we begin doing power training and all that kind of stuff. We start doing the jumping activities because we've strengthened these areas of weakness that commonly lead to injury if you have these muscular imbalances.
So using a squat as an example, you may come in and do an assisted squat. If you're starting, you have imbalances in your squat. We see that you have, you have all these compensations coming out when you do squat, a knee going this way, a knee going that way, maybe hunched over too far anteriorly. You certainly don't want to add weight to anybody's back then.
Yeah.
Could be like an assisted squat, go, which is no weight, and you're holding on to something, maybe to a body weight squat later on.
Yeah.
Right. And then maybe adding some light dumbbells later on. I'm just talking about one exercise, the squat.
Yeah.
Really working on form. And then once you're strong enough with the squat and form looks good, then start loading some weight on your back like a proper squat. And the whole time being aware of, the imbalances and any pain or anything like that. And if you're getting any of that or it's exacerbating them, back off again.
Yeah. And if you're doing this by yourself, use a mirror, use your phone, something like that can really help capture all the angles for you.
The phone in the mirror is great, actually.
Mm-hmm,
I've done that on myself and seen all kinds of things pop up that you're like, man, I didn't know I was even doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I had to give the squat is a great example. If I had to give like an order of operations of how you were going to trial, like someone walks in here right now into my living room and I need to assess their squat pattern. How would I do it? The first thing I would do would be sitting up from a chair and then sitting back into that chair. No assistance as far as like a bar in front of them or anything. If they need their hands to get up from the chair, fine.
Okay.
But I want to see that true movement pattern unassisted, because when you add that assistance, and this is something we do a lot in physical therapy, when you add that assistance, it can correct these movement patterns. So for example, if someone has a lot of shifting of their hips when they step up onto a stair, I may give them a kettlebell on that side, and it's actually an assistance to help their weak glute med control that pelvic shift. So adding weight can almost be an assistance at times. But so I want to see that true movement pattern, and I think it's super safe to begin from the chair and sitting back down to the chair. Yeah. From there, I would just see an active range of motion, normal squat. And from there, I would always, you brought up a great point. At never have I, in the last year and a half, I have never had a client of mine, personal training, back squat. So I have never put a bar on anyone's back in the last at least year and a half. I've done it before as a personal trainer, but so I wouldn't even load someone up with a bar on their back. I would do more of like a goblet squat with like a 20-pound dumbbell and then have them perform that. All of this to like a box too. So they have something to fall down to if it were to go awry. Because you're just screening them. This is the first time you've ever seen this. You have no idea who the person is. So I wouldn't load them up until with a bar until stage 5 or well beyond that.
Which for you, you don't see, you probably wouldn't do that for, I don't know. It sounds like you haven't done it for a year or so.
Yeah. I mean, one, I don't have a true squat rack at the location that I train people at right now. But then on top of that, it's, as I've gotten a little bit more down my physical therapy realm, it's not that it's bad, but it's just, we can do the same thing with safer exercises, and the back squat is just becoming it's a lot of load through that spine. It's kind of strange. When are you ever throwing something over your back like that in today's world?
Oh yeah.
So I just have a variety of opinions about the back squat, and I haven't used it or found a client at this point that I've used it on since I left Auburn. When I was at Auburn, I had, like a 20-year-old female that I was training who was on the rowing team. We loaded her up on back squat at times, but we had gone well past, we had been training for a handful of months and gone through all these stages that I just went through essentially.
Yeah. And plus she's an athlete and very fit and everything. And the people we're talking about are people.
The doctor said you need to make a change. And that was like, that was like the kickoff.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been seeing a lot of since I moved to Jacksonville and kind of been sending out my flyers of personal training, that sort of thing. It's people that realize that at a certain point they have been living in a non-healthy way and they have to make a lifestyle change. And then the doctor has proven that at that point. So they've bought in. But so at point 5, we're talking about increasing our repetitions of our strength work. We're increasing our endurance. So, so strength work is any work between, it's debatable, 6 to 12 reps. And then endurance is 15 plus or 20 plus repetitions. So this will be necessary. Like this endurance load is going to be necessary for some of these weak muscles that we're looking to strengthen that I mentioned in those cross syndromes. And the reason for that is these muscles in these cross syndromes that are typically weak, like the abdominals is an example in lower cross syndrome, or an upper cross syndrome, the lower traps. These are what we call phasic muscles. So these are muscles that are typically tonic or phasic, can't remember. These are muscles that are typically on. So they're firing a lot more throughout the day. And so we eventually do want to get to that endurance load. And so speaking of using the jogging example of someone again, so someone who really likes jogging, you really are going to need some endurance ability of your glute med to stabilize your pelvis as you're doing, 10,000 steps or so. Let's say you're doing a 5K or something like that. You're going through a variety of load, or you're going through many loads to that glute med, and it needs to be prepared for that endurance. So as you get prepared to do things that, using the jogger as the common example, you jog for 2 miles and now you're getting ready for the big 5K or whatever the case may be. We want to start increasing the workload of those muscles that I mentioned specifically to jogging or specific to your activity that are a little bit more used continually in an endurance way. So we want to start doing mini repetitions of those exercises, like kicking our leg out to the side or clamshells or things like that. Anything for the glute med. So we need to train for that. Basically, we need to train for the load that's going to be on for a marathon for those little muscles that are weak and the things that we like to do. So it's, again, activity dependent, but the jogging example is pretty common. And then as far as at that point, when you are, if you want to continue by yourself, the way I've educated people on continuing by yourself and kind of knowing when to improve or when to progress things are you generally just do things with more intensity as a general rule of thumb. And then for increasing things like power and that sort of thing, never forget the basics and then just have fun and be safe.
Yeah.
And then progression can be an improvement or an advancement of any one variable. So this is something I had to get across to a lot of patients as a physical therapist is that there's a variety of variables we use to dictate the workload within a session, whether that be personal training or just with working out a muscle. And so you can progress or improve or advance any one of those variables, and that would be a progression in your workout. So think of what the variables are. Those are time, weight, resistance, improved or increased range of motion. So let's use the squat example. Let's say you were squatting to 90. Now you're going below 90. That in itself is a progression. So all these sorts of things, just changing one variable of the exercise, whether that be I was doing it in 6 minutes and now I do it in 5. All of these things are progressions and ways you can naturally control or naturally monitor your progression and advance it.
Right. And most people think of progression as, all right, I need more weight on the bar, or I need to run faster.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really, I feel like the older we get, you need to think about form and function, improve range of motion. Are you able to do things with perfect form, lower range of motions, squatting all the way down below 90, that type of thing.
Yeah. And it's fun for people like Keoni and I who love this stuff to sit here and just wax on poetically about various aspects of it. But the fact of the matter is I get a lot of people coming to me who are in a paralysis by analysis point where it's like, well, Bryan, should I be exercising 4 times a week and jogging 2 times a week and this and this and this? And it's like, at this point, the doctor told you just need to start moving and you just need to start moving. And that should start with a walk. And then from there, we can work on your ability to move well. And then from there, we can strengthen your movements. And then from there, the world is our oyster.
Yeah. Right. It's about movement. It's movement. I mean, and movement creates, once you start and you start light, like just walking, now you have a base for consistency.
Right.
If you jump right into jumping rope or plyometrics or going too hard, too fast, you're going to lose that consistency, which is now you're going to create this cycle in your mind that exercise is painful.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to do it. Every time I do it, I hurt myself.
Exactly. And as a physical therapist, the best, I think what we do is load management. And that's what you have to do by yourself at this beginning stage. People start really gung ho and they do start jumping rope or they do start jumping over the kettlebell as their first workout. And it's just too gung ho and you're not necessarily prepared for those loads. And we want to manage those loads the best way we can. And that starts with just walking and just moving your body.
Right.
And I just want to touch on 2 things that people generally ask me about, like at a personal training consultation. So diet, we can make that as complicated as ever. We could do a million podcasts on a variety of diets.
And there's a million diets out there.
Yeah, exactly. But just general rules of thumbs I tell people starting. There's the MyFitnessPal apps. So you can use that if you're truly looking to track calories. But at the same time, my entire life, I think maybe for a month or something like that in my entire life, I've tracked calories, Keoni. I don't know if you've ever done it.
I don't track. I don't track calories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to have an idea of how many calories you're getting in per day. I think that's helpful. But yeah, calories, it's too labor intensive, and I think it creates a neuroses after a while with a lot of people.
And that's perfect. And I think that's exactly what happens with the labor intensive is perfect. And I think that's what kills the consistency. And that's where we get it the same way with the working out, where it's like, well, Bryan, should I do 4 of these or 10 of these or da-da-da-da? What does the order need to be? And it's just, it's so labor intensive that you're not going to keep up with it when compared to, I wake up on Sunday and I go for a 30-minute walk, like to the Starbucks and back or something.
Right.
I and then staying with the diet. Don't count calories, make calories count. That's Mike Dolce's saying. I love that
Yeah.
saying. So
Yep.
that's just talking about getting as much nutrient packed foods as possible and not worrying about the actual caloric intake as much as how healthy is this for me, and
Right.
focusing on that aspect.
Right.
Jade came up with eat less, exercise less. So if you're exercising less, we want to eat less. If you're exercising more, we want to eat more. So just as a general rule of thumb, as you begin an exercise routine, as well as same thing with, this is also comes from Mike Dolce, the earth grown nutrients. And if you can't pronounce it, you flip over the ingredient list of the food and you can't really pronounce it, I wouldn't eat it. And just all those are just general basic starting guidelines.
Yeah, and I'll just add some other things. Like if you're really worried about calories, I mean, calories do matter in the long run. And
Yep.
if you're really worried about them, I mean, there's so many simple things you can do that affect calories that you really don't have to count them. One is, okay, don't snack. That's going to eliminate a lot of calories. You know, just have meals. Right now, intermittent fasting, we've talked about a number of times, that over the long run decreases calories, which can help with weight loss, weight management and stuff. But every time you know the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger, that's a big one. We've talked about that before too. You know, if you, for example, you have a taste for ice cream because you're coming home from work after a stressful day, that's probably more emotional hunger. Maybe a glass of water will do. Like just being more in tune with yourself, and that over time will help with counting calories to some extent.
Absolutely. And those are great, again, starter tips. That's not labor intensive. Not snacking is less labor intensive. That gives you more time.
Right.
And then sleep, it's obviously an important point as we're exercising. We want to increase our sleep as we're exercising. I use like the iPhone, just the bedtime iPhone app to somewhat track like how many hours I'm getting. And
I
again,
use the Aura Ring. I actually use the Aura Ring. It's great.
How's it going, Keoni? Because it was new last time I talked to you, I believe.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's been insightful for me. One thing I know is my deep sleep. What happens is that if I don't get to bed before 10, it seems like I lose out on deep sleep a little bit, according to the ring.
Yeah.
And what I really also like about it is it gives you that readiness score, right? Like if, for example, the readiness score is kind of telling you, all right, well, you didn't get enough sleep. You may not want to go too intensely today. You could even think about that readiness score saying, if you keep doing this over a few days, you're going to get this cold. Like you're going to get sick. You're going to get immune depressed or whatever. But no, it's good. I do like tracking devices. They're not gold standard, but if they track you day in and day out, you really get a good idea of your patterns. So
that's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, and the ring is one of them. The phone works too. The ring is just really here's my ring right here, but it's just really it's just easy. I'm always wearing it. So
and I actually got one of those Apple Watches for my birthday.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that I mentioned Will, one of my clients. One of the big things when he was starting this back in January, so he is exactly what I've painted the picture as in this podcast. So just he went to his doctor, all that sort of stuff. And the first thing he was mentioning to me is just how much being able to see on the Apple Watch, like it fills these little rings of activity. Yeah. And at a certain point, he's very analytical based. He works in analytics, and to be able to see the rings is the biggest thing for him. So finding out what type of person you are and what type of motivating factors, like he wants to see all three of those rings. There's like an exercise, a stand, and a movement ring. And he wants to see all of them close every day.
So by the end of the day, get them closed, right?
Yeah. So if that's your thing, if this tracking does help, maybe that's something that helps you be more consistent. But if it's something that seems a little bit more laborious to you, like the calorie tracking, for example, in MyFitnessPal, when I did that month or so, it was like, holy hell, I can't keep doing this every every 45 minutes. I got to come in here and say I ate a protein bar and I had an apple 20 minutes later and this. And it's just, that became too labor intensive. But at the same vein, something like the watch or the ring that you have where it's just on, and you get this information. That information can tell you a lot.
And like you said, it's motivating if by the end of the
Right.
day you haven't closed everything and got your max steps in or whatever it may be. It is motivating where you go out and do it, or you're not getting adequate sleep, so maybe you get to bed earlier, that type of thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's really it, and that's my model. You can look up the NASM OPT model, and that's optimum performance training model, and that's kind of how, as a personal trainer, at least how I learned about going through kind of like these steps of readiness. But at the same time, this is at this point with all the experience that I've had. This is kind of how I go about viewing things. Some people have different opinions. I know Pavel Tazzolini, who I love, who's like the kettlebell godfather, is truly believes that strength is the bottom of the pillar. There's a variety of ways to go about this, but the biggest thing is be safe, move first and foremost, and move safely, and don't put yourself in a precarious position at the very start. And a lot of that precarious positioning comes from being so gung-ho and going on YouTube and finding out a workout from, some person with a 12-pack, and they're jumping over tires and crap like that. And then next thing you know, you go and jump over those tires for your first workout and your knee hurts. And now you can't work out. Right. And it's just it doesn't set up for long-term success. And I believe going through a few of these steps in this sequential order really can help you stay in the game.
So yeah, I agree, and I guess I was the benefit of doing this podcast. Whether you sent me the notes, so I was going through these notes as you're doing this podcast. It's fascinating. Will people be able to have something like this where they'll have like updated notes based on this podcast? Is there anything you plan on doing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I'll be kind of trickling out these order of operations and sending them out with a little bit more detail and explanation. And that's in the show notes. So if you want to sign up there, you will get this directly to your inbox.
Cool. All right.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening. Keoni, I hope you feel better by the next time we talk.
By next time, I'll be on the point.
Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks. Bye.